Ukrainian forces in action near the Eastern Front, exhausted and stretched thin by 2.5 years of war, facing relentless bombardment and waves of Russian troops. The war is currently being fought on two major fronts. In the east, along hundreds of kilometers that Russia has been trying to break through in the direction of Pokrovsk, and in the north, where Russia has been trying to seize the major city of Kharkiv. Ukrainian forces have seized territory in the Kursk region in Russia. The Eastern Front is where the majority of Russian troops have hunkered down for the past year, making small but steady advances at a tremendous human cost. Ukraine has evacuated cities it can't defend from intense Russian bombardment. The fighting has been intense all summer and now fall, with Ukraine reporting over 100 clashes in a single day last week. Russia has been concentrating its forces on the strategic city of Pokrovsk. Taking it would allow easier access to the rest of the east and south of Ukraine. Meanwhile, in the north, Ukraine responded to a wave of Russian attacks by pushing into Russia itself, seizing territory. Ukraine claims to have seized as much as 1,250 square kilometers in the Kursk region since August 6th. Forces were able to move fast initially, but few think Ukraine will be able to expand what it holds already. Ukraine has largely sealed the territory off, blowing up major bridges linking it to the rest of Russia. That also complicates Russian military supply lines. But Russian forces have reinforced their defenses to contain Ukraine and have started their own counter-offensive operations. It's been an incredibly bloody conflict since Russia invaded in February 2022. Both sides release very little information about casualties, but the British Ministry of Defense says 610,000 Russian soldiers are dead or wounded. Ukraine says it's lost 31,000 soldiers, but the real number is thought to be far higher. There's no independent verification of any of these figures. President Zelensky can't match Moscow's troop strength, defenses, or its ability to recruit more soldiers, so he's changed strategy, challenging Western allies who have been afraid of being drawn into direct confrontation with Russia and possibly even nuclear escalation. He's pushing them to let Ukraine take more risks by using long-range weapons to fire deep into Russia. US-made ATACMS missiles have different ranges. Some could strike up to 300 kilometers over the border. That would put dozens of Russian military bases, air bases, ammunition depots, and oil refineries within range. Without permission to use those missiles inside Russia, Ukraine has stepped up its long-range drone attacks on refineries and ammunition sites over the border, even triggering an earthquake at one site. And it's developed its own missiles, but it still sees Western missiles as a way to turn the tide. The US and its Western allies have held the line on strikes inside Russia. Changing those leaders' minds is the challenge Zelensky has set himself for this week, to win them over to what he says is the only way to win the war.
For more, let's bring in Frank Ledwidge, Senior Lecturer in War Studies at Portsmouth University. He joins us now from Oxford. Welcome back to DW, Frank. As we just heard there at the end of that report, Zelensky is on a mission in the US to get support that he says is the only way to win the war. Do you agree with that assessment?
Good afternoon, Namisha. You mentioned or quoted in that excellent report two presidents, so I'm going to give you a third, President Pavel of the Czech Republic, himself a former general and extremely pro-Ukraine. And he says it's unrealistic to hope that the war is going to end with Ukrainian victory in the next weeks or months. And at some point, Ukraine is going, essentially, he hints very strongly, Ukraine is going to have to give up land. I think that's absolutely true. And we are moving towards, I think, a situation where matters are becoming more critical to Ukraine every week, indeed every day. Today, for example, it looks as if they're going to lose the fortress town of Vuhledar in the south on that front that was mentioned in the war. So are things, is now today critical? No. Is next week? It'll be more so, and so on. I think we are, though, in the strategic sense, at a tipping point.
You mentioned the tipping point and the fact that the outlook for Zelensky and Ukraine getting his way does seem to be bleak, according to you. Zelensky has also said Russia can only be forced into peace. So is your sense that Ukraine's push into Russian territory not really putting any pressure on Putin then?
It was a gamble. It was a gamble possibly worth taking. However, what the Ukrainians have done is fix themselves into Russia. Now they have to defend that territory with troops that would have been far better used in the south. Now, the gamble, of course, was that Russia would take the bait, as it were, and move some of their better units, or many of them, to retake a fairly remote part of Russia. And they have not done that. Instead, what's happened is Ukraine has now withdrawn forces from the south, made it even weaker than before, and now have to defend that area in Russia. So the gamble has failed. Now, what they do about that, we will see. I suspect they'll try to hold on to it. But as the report said there, the Ukrainians are overextended. So are the Russians. But the Ukrainians face the problem that they are 1/4 or less of the population, and they have perhaps even stronger or even more difficult situation with respect to recruiting and manpower. And that's the centre of gravity militarily in this war.
So you mentioned failed gambles there. Another push that Zelensky and Ukraine have continuously been making is that permission to use long-range missiles in Russia. We expect to see that once again from Zelensky in the US right now. What are his chances of success and of things changing?
Well, who knows what's going on in the chancelleries of the US. Certainly, the UK is pushing for this. The UK's problems are they don't have many of these missiles. And that's important because the strike density, which is to say the numbers of missiles to be used, is important. Just to give you some context, to take Serbia out of the war in 1999, a tiny country by comparison, it took 10,000 airstrikes. Now, there's nothing like that available to the Ukrainians. They could well exercise some coercion, but it's very unlikely at the strategic level, that is to say the really important level, that a few missiles lobbed into Western Russia will make a major difference to the war itself. What it could do, of course, is encourage some form of escalation. And that, of course, is what is restraining Biden's hand, I suspect.
Frank Ledwidge, thank you so much again for your very clear analysis.
Thank you, ma'am.